Digital surveillance and censorship have expanded, with authorities using cyber laws to intimidate and criminalize dissent online. Access to justice is routinely denied, particularly for victims of state violence, as courts remain heavily influenced by the regime. Corruption. Corruption remains one of the most corrosive forces undermining Uganda's governance, development, and public trust. It is deeply entrenched across all levels of society, particularly within the state apparatus, where it has fueled inefficiency, mismanagement of resources, and eroded institutional integrity. Despite the existence of a robust legal and institutional anti-corruption framework, the gap between anti-corruption rhetoric and actual enforcement has widened, fueling public disillusionment and obstructing national progress. Uganda loses an estimated 10 trillion Ugandan shillings, approximately 2.7 billion United States dollars, to corruption annually, IG report, 2022, equivalent to the budget allocated for key services such as education, health and water combined in financial year 2024-25. This massive hemorrhage of public funds severely undermines service delivery, delays critical infrastructure projects, and worsens poverty levels. Key structural and political drivers behind this persistent corruption crisis include lack of genuine political will, evidenced by selective prosecutions and the shielding of politically connected individuals. Weak and under-resourced anti-corruption institutions, often lacking independence and saddled with overlapping mandates. Over-centralization of power, particularly within the presidency, which dilutes accountability and subverts constitutional checks. A political economy dependent on corruption, sustaining a cycle of impunity and normalizing theft of public resources. High-profile scandals, such as the #Parliament exhibition revelations and the Iron Sheets scandal involving the office of the Prime Minister, have laid bare the impunity with which public officials operate. These cases have sparked public outrage and attracted international condemnation, including sanctions from foreign governments targeting implicated Ugandan officials. Uganda is ranked 140th out of 180 countries in Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, with a score of 26 out of 100, well below the global average of 43. This reflects the country's deteriorating governance environment and persistent failure to curb high-level corruption. The impact of corruption is devastating and far-reaching. It deprives citizens of access to quality healthcare, education, and public safety. It undermines investor confidence, stifles entrepreneurship, and degrades the business environment. It deepens inequality, erodes democratic institutions, and feeds political discontent and instability. It weakens tax morale, as citizens become less willing to contribute to a state perceived as predatory and self-serving. Ultimately, corruption is not just a governance issue, it is a national security threat. It perpetuates poverty, fosters inequality, and locks Uganda in a cycle of underdevelopment. Without bold political reform and meaningful enforcement of anti-corruption laws, Uganda will continue to rank among the world's poorest nations, despite its potential. Conclusion. The endemic corruption, the systematic erosion of democratic institutions, the abuse of military courts, the suppression of the media, and the persistent violation of fundamental human rights reflect a regime solely committed to clinging to power. As the rule of law collapses under the weight of impunity, Uganda's future is held hostage by authoritarianism. This state of affairs must not only be resisted, but decisively rejected. R. Promise for a new Uganda now. We, the National Unity Platform Party, united in our pursuit of a just and equitable society, where good governance and democracy thrive. Recognizing the inherent value of every individual, we commit to restoring the principles of transparency, accountability, and citizen participation. 1.1. Restoring constitutional order. We will reinstate presidential term and age limits as originally enshrined in the 1995 Constitution. We will reverse amendments that undermine constitutional safeguards and ensure constitutional amendments require broad public participation, parliamentary and civil society scrutiny. We will guarantee judicial independence by transferring the power to appoint the Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice, and other senior judicial officers from the Presidency to an independent Judicial Appointments Commission comprising representatives from the Uganda Law Society (ULS) Parliament, and civil society organizations. We will reinforce judicial independence by increasing funding and operational autonomy for the judiciary to ensure it functions free from executive interference. 1.2. Amend the UPDF Act. We will amend the UPDF Act to prohibit the trial of civilians in military courts, in line with Supreme Court rulings and international human rights law. We will effect the transfer of all pending civilian cases in military courts to civilian judicial institutions. We will criminalize enforced disappearances, torture, and incommunicado detention through strict legislation and establish an independent Human Rights Accountability Commission. We will end arbitrary arrests of political opponents and civil society actors and ensure state actors involved in abuses are prosecuted. 1.3. Media freedoms. We will stop all security interference in journalistic work. The UPDF and Uganda Police Force will be barred from harassing journalists or media personnel in their media houses. We will outlaw all arbitrary internet and social media shutdowns and ensure that digital rights are constitutionally protected. We will restructure the media and broadcasting councils into independent, professional bodies that promote press freedom, pluralism, and public access to information. 1.4. Protection of the civil society. We will reverse restrictive laws and regulations that hinder the work of NGOs, CSOs, and grassroots movements. We will re-register all NGOs, CBOs and other civil society organizations previously banned due to unqualified political-related reasons. We will allocate public funding to registered civil society organizations engaged in service delivery, rights awareness, and We will allocate public funding to registered civil society organizations engaged in service delivery, rights awareness, and democratic governance. We will create structured platforms for CSO engagement in public policy and budgeting processes at all levels of government. 1.5. Rebuilding electoral integrity. We will transfer the power to appoint and approve electoral commission members from the President to Parliament and an independent vetting body involving the Uganda Law Society and civil society representation. We will audit and reform Uganda's entire electoral framework, including campaign financing, voter registration, and vote tallying, to ensure free, fair, and transparent elections. 1.6. Fighting corruption and promoting integrity. We will implement a zero-tolerance policy on corruption across all public institutions. We will digitize all government payments and revenue collection systems to eliminate leakages and stop cash-based transactions in ministries and agencies. We will correct managerial inefficiencies and empower anti-corruption bodies like the IG, Auditor General, and PPDA with full autonomy, clear prosecutorial powers, and guaranteed budgets. We will establish a public integrity court to fast-track corruption cases and recover stolen public assets. 1.6. Efficient and accountable governance. We will promote merit-based appointments and strengthen performance-based evaluations across government ministries and departments. We will decentralize service delivery, ensuring that regional and local governments have adequate resources and decision-making power to meet the needs of their communities. We will publish annual transparency reports on resource use, procurement, and service delivery outcomes at all government levels and make them accessible to the public. Manifesto priority. 2. End corruption and wasteful government. Expenditure. Introduction. Uganda is currently facing a serious breakdown in her fiscal discipline, marked by unchecked supplementary budgets, excessive borrowing, extravagant spending, and chronic underfunding of essential social services such as health, education, and water and sanitation. These practices undermine the credibility of the national budget, weaken long-term planning, and create dangerous fiscal imbalances that threaten our country's economic stability and social development. Situation analysis. Millions of Ugandans are stuck in absolute poverty amidst the wasteful expenditures, growing appetite for corruption and skyrocketing debt. According to the Uganda National Household Survey 2023-24, more than 7.3 million Ugandans, nearly 1 in 6 citizens, live below the absolute poverty line, defined as earning less than $1 or Sh 3,663 per day, per person. Put this in perspective, if somehow one is considered to be at Sh 4,000 equals per day, per person, that one is not included in the statistic. Think about this and consider that in real terms, 60% plus of the population may in fact be in real poverty and growing. Considering the birth rate of Uganda and the factors of disparity including corruption. Now, Sh 3,663 equals per day, per person, means about Sh 100,000 equals for a full 30-day month. Try to ration this average for rent, shelter, food, feeding, transportation, commuting, medical, healthcare, and education, including skilling. No wonder millions of our youth have moved to Middle East to find a way out. Wasteful government expenditure. The wastefulness begins with the office of president and his residence. General Museveni and his family continues to enjoy presidential privilege since he ascended to power 40 years ago after leading a coup against Uganda's former ruler. It is only in Uganda where Museveni has more cars than ambulances attached to public hospitals. General Museveni has over 600 vehicles at his disposal, yet the total number of ambulances in public facilities is about 178. You cannot justify General Museveni as keeping 400 vehicles under his office and 266 vehicles at his residence, State House. Notably, 71 of these are dedicated solely to Museveni's convoy for domestic travel, raising grew from 33 in FY 2018-19. While the State House policy statement provides a cost range for these vehicles, between Sh 150 billion and Sh 500 million, the actual costs of the president's personal vehicles remain undisclosed. Moreover, annual expenses on vehicle maintenance are about plus Sh 7.2 billion annually, while fuel costs, subsumed under inland travel expenses, total Sh 80 billion each year. General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the son to Museveni, maintains a fleet of nearly a dozen vehicles, complete with amenities akin to those of his father's convoy. Janet Museveni, the Museveni's wife, also has her own convoy with similar facilities. This isn't the representation of leaders governing an economically challenged country reliant on unpayable loans, rather, it resembles the grandiosity of kings, queens, and royalty. Museveni's staff roster includes 82 presidential advisors, 142 resident district commissioners (RDCs), 98 deputy RDCs, about 89 assistant RDCs, 27 senior presidential assistants, 40 private secretaries, a substantial workforce of 761 staff at the Office of Presidency, and a domestic staff of 996 at his residence alone, comprising 59 waitresses, 14 room attendants, 80 gardeners, 129 drivers, 50 cleaners, 35 cooks, and 12 chefs, among others. This extensive payroll incurs a staggering annual cost of approximately Sh 50 billion. Furthermore, Museveni's Office of the President employs an additional 761 individuals. Museveni's Office of the President employs an additional 761 individuals. Moreover, there is an apparent lack of clear guidelines for their recruitment, qualifications, and remuneration. In addition to these, we continue to remunerate former prime ministers as presidential advisors. Such spending, if left unchecked, it will deny the majority of Ugandans the basic necessities such as education, health, safe and clean water, and social protection. With 529 MPs, our parliament is excessively large. Uganda ranks among the highest in legislator pay in Africa, surpassed mainly by South Africa. Every 5 years, members of parliament receive a car allowance, regardless of whether they are newly elected or returning. This means that re-elected MPs continue to receive funds for the same entitlement. For instance, the 11th Parliament includes 181 members who returned from. General Museveni has over 600 vehicles at his disposal, yet the total number of ambulances in public facilities is about 178. The 10th Parliament, with several having served more than 2 terms. This unchecked spending continues to erode the majority of Ugandans' critical life servers. Moreover, while wasteful spending soars, the health sector remains under-resourced. 82 districts still lack a fully equipped public general hospital. This glaring disconnect between budget allocations and on-the-ground need underscores a misalignment of priorities by the NRM government. National debt. Uganda's rising public debt and the growing burden of debt servicing continue to raise serious concerns about fiscal sustainability. Interest payments alone are projected to reach approximately 9.24 trillion Ugandan shillings in FY 2025-26, consuming over 25% of domestic revenue. This level of debt service significantly constrains the government's ability to invest in essential sectors such as health, education, and infrastructure. Our total debt, external and domestic, as of March 2023 was Sh's 85.2 trillion, exceeding that year's total budget of Sh's 52.7 trillion, according to the Bank of Uganda State of the Economy April 2023 report, exceeding the pre-pandemic levels tracked at 34.6% of GDP. By FY 2021-22, it had risen above 50%, breaching the IMF's 50% threshold for low-income countries, a warning sign of increasing debt vulnerability. As of June 2023, Uganda's public debt reached Sh's 96.1 trillion, about 25.3 billion United States dollars, equivalent to roughly 52% of GDP. Of this, Sh's 0.44.6 trillion was domestic debt, while Sh's 0.51.5 trillion was external. According to the Bank of Uganda, debt servicing accounted for about 35% of domestic revenue in FY 2024-25, meaning that Sh's 35 out of every Sh's 100 collected in revenue went toward debt repayment. This trend, if unchecked, could push Uganda toward debt distress and increase the risk of default. Today, the NRM government is celebrating the Sh's 0.226.3 trillion economy, but however more than 54% of this celebration is in debt. This implies that to date per capita debt stands at about Sh's 3.5 million. In the current financial year 2025-26, the NRM government plans to collect Sh's 37.2 trillion in domestic revenues out of the Sh's 72.3 trillion nation budget. This suggests that the rest, more than 50%, of the budget will be financed through borrowing. The decline in external aid and development support, especially following increased restrictions on civil society and the suspension of over 9,000 NGOs in recent years, has deepened reliance on borrowing. The NRM government continues to acquire non-concessional loans to meet recurrent expenditures, reinforcing a cycle of debt rollover and rising fiscal pressure. If this trajectory persists, Uganda risks falling into a public debt safety trap, where deceptive indicators mask deepening financial instability. High debt servicing crowds out investment in critical sectors, undermines economic growth, and worsens inequalities, ultimately threatening Uganda's long-term development and social cohesion. Corruption continues to distort public administration, with estimates indicating over Sh 0.10 trillion annually, an amount equivalent to the money needed to constructing and retooling 82 districts in Uganda without a single public general hospital, 1,112 parishes without a public primary school and 115 sub-counties without substantial public secondary schools, lost due to administrative inefficiencies and graft. The current situation continues to live approximately 15,400,000 Ugandans, about 3% of the population, in extreme poverty. These ones continue to live below $1 a day. National budget. Over the past decade, the cost of public administration has surged sharply without a corresponding increase in domestic revenue, shrinking the fiscal space available for development. This has crowded out essential development projects, whose funding has significantly declined. The high costs of managing the public sector, coupled with poor coordination and administration, undermine effective implementation of vital development initiatives. Budget credibility has eroded due to excessive reliance on supplementary budgets. These rose from 6.7% of total expenditure in FY 2017-18 to 9.7% in FY 2021-22, far exceeding the internationally accepted 3% threshold. Debt servicing now consumes over half, 57%, of the national budget, totaling 41.7 trillion Ugandan shillings in FY 2024-25. This amount even exceeds anticipated domestic revenue, 32.3 trillion Ugandan shillings, meaning all domestic revenue is diverted to debt repayment. Uganda spends roughly 114 billion Ugandan shillings daily servicing debt, more than combined budgets for health, education, and social protection. The FY 2025-26 budget for key services such as education, health and water combined is $11.44 trillion Ugandan shillings out of the $72.3 trillion national budget, highlight a slight increase from 10.204 trillion Ugandan shillings in FY 2024-25, raising serious concerns about the NRM government's capacity to save the lives of the 48 million Ugandans. This contraction in fiscal space stems from lower external aid, a deliberate cutback in domestic borrowing, reduced inflows from the petroleum fund, and scaled-back refinancing. Meanwhile, statutory obligations, particularly debt servicing and interest, now absorb an increasing share, shrinking the discretionary budget from 28.1 trillion Ugandan shillings to 24.2 trillion Ugandan shillings. Sectoral allocations in FY 2025-26 further expose a disconnect between ambition and funding. Although the 10-fold growth strategy targets agro-industry, tourism, minerals, oil, science, and technology, these sectors are only allocated around 2.67 trillion Ugandan shillings, far short of the 4.7 trillion Ugandan shillings earmarked in NDPI. Although the 10-fold growth strategy targets agro-industry, tourism, minerals, oil, science, and technology, these sectors are only allocated around 2.67 trillion Ugandan shillings, far short of the 4.7 trillion Ugandan shillings earmarked in NDPIV. raising serious concerns about the NRM government's capacity to deliver its ambitious development agenda. Domestic revenue generation. In FY 2024-25, the government collected 27.7 trillion Ugandan shillings in domestic revenue, significantly below the projected 32.3 trillion Ugandan shillings, leaving a financing gap of 39.7 trillion Ugandan shillings needed to support a 72 trillion Ugandan shillings budget. This uncovered deficit accounted for 55% of total expenditure, meaning that only 45% of the budget was funded through domestic resources, a level insufficient to meet Uganda's development goals. Yet, the previous FY 2024-25 budget revealed about 2.27 trillion Ugandan shillings in wasteful expenditure, including special meals and drinks, 300 billion Ugandan shillings, welfare and entertainment, 136 billion Ugandan shillings, workshops, seminars and meetings, 237 billion Ugandan shillings, travel inland and abroad, 761 billion Ugandan shillings, advertising and public relations, 79 billion Ugandan shillings, light vehicle acquisition, 56 billion Ugandan shillings, recruitment expenses, 13 billion Ugandan shillings, postage and courier services, 2.8 billion Ugandan shillings. Together, these items accounted for approximately SH's 2 trillion, far greater than SH's 872.57 billion allocated to water, sanitation, environmental protection, and social protection combined in that financial year. These funds would be better redirected toward essential services. For the financial year ending June 2, 2025, revenue collection is projected at SH's 31.9 trillion, representing approximately 14.3% of GDP. This remains well below the internationally recognized benchmark of 30% tax to GDP needed to achieve sustainable development. Emerging and low-income economies like Uganda typically have an untapped tax potential of 8–9% of GDP, according to the IMF. Tapping into this could provide more resources for public investment and strengthen private sector growth. Mineral and natural resource revenue potential. Uganda is richly endowed with diverse mineral resources, such as iron ore, limestone, gold, rare earth elements, graphite, cobalt, and copper, found across multiple regions of the country. These minerals hold significant promise for fiscal revenue generation, technology transfer, and job creation. The Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative (EITI) 2021-22 report indicates that Uganda's total value of mineral production soared from SH's 19.9 billion in FY 2020-21 to SH's 202 billion in FY 2021-22, driven by increased output in limestone 93 billion Ugandan shillings, iron ore SH's 72 billion, pozzolana 17.7 billion Ugandan shillings, wolfram SH's 6.8 billion, and gold SH's 3.4 billion. That same report highlights that only 20 of the 558 licensed mining companies were responsible for 98.8% of total mining revenues, each remitting at least SH's 6 billion. However, transparency challenges persist. The EITI flags issues such as undisclosed contracts, incomplete data reporting from companies, and discrepancies in gold export figures, highlighting the urgent need for improved governance and monitoring systems. Conclusion: Uganda's economic future hinges on restoring fiscal discipline, curbing reckless borrowing, and eliminating wasteful expenditure. The current trajectory, marked by budget shortfalls, rising debt, and misplaced priorities, undermines service delivery and entrenches inequality. Public financing must be reoriented toward transparency, efficiency, and national development. Promise for a new Uganda now. 2.1. End wasteful spending. We will cut extravagant and non-essential public spending, starting with slashing the cabinet to a maximum 20 ministers, reducing the number of MPs and their bloated costs, scrapping redundant political appointments such as DRCs, RCSs and their deputies, and capping vehicle fleets. Lavish budgets for meals, entertainment, and travel will be reallocated to health, education, and social protection. 2.2. Strengthen budget credibility. We will end excessive supplementary budgets and limit this to the recommended 3% threshold. All public spending will be transparent, accountable, people-centered, and within the approved budgets. We will ensure that budget planning aligns with national and regional priorities. 2.3. Reduce the debt burden. We will halt reckless borrowing, prioritize concessional financing, and ensure that no new loan is approved without rigorous public scrutiny and a clear return on investment plan. We will discuss and renegotiate our debts with our creditors to a level Ugandans can manage to repay within a short period of time without affecting key service delivery indicators. 2.4. Reform the mineral sector. We will enforce transparency in mining and oil contracts, ring-fence mineral and oil revenues for education, health, and infrastructure projects, and empower the Uganda National Mining Company to serve public, not private, interests. We will make sure all oil contracts are in the interest of Ugandans and disseminated for public scrutiny. 2.5. Promote fair and simple taxation. We will simplify the tax system, eliminate taxes on essential items like menstrual products, scholastic materials and school data bundles, introduce a pay tax-free threshold of UGX 1 million regarded as low-income earners. Any Ugandan earning below 1 million will not pay and reward tax compliance with competitive incentives. 2.6. Expand domestic revenue without burdening the poor. Through smarter tax administration, digital technologies, and closing loopholes, we aim to raise Uganda's tax to GDP ratio by at least 6 percentage points, without raising tax rates for ordinary citizens. 2.7. Enforce austerity and lead by example. We will ensure that salaries for top officials are within affordable range for the nation, and perks like car allowances for MPs and ministers' convoys will be abolished. Leadership must serve, not enrich. 2.8. Reprioritize social spending. Funds saved from cost-cutting will be redirected to build hospitals in underserved areas, improve school infrastructure, and expand access to clean water and social protection. 2.9. Restore fiscal rule of law. We will uphold the Charter for Fiscal Responsibility, enforce expenditure limits, and ensure every public official is held accountable for how public funds are used. 2.10. Revive confidence in public finance. All public contracts, mining agreements, and national budgets will be published and subjected to parliamentary and public review. 2.11. Expand social safety nets. We will expand social safety nets like in-kind transfers and food subsidies to reduce poverty and promote decent living and inclusive growth. All individuals with physical and mental disabilities that hinder them from meaningful productivity will be 100% catered for by the government.